Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. This is a gathering of the protagonists of the protocol. We're not just noodling with nodes, we're building the backbone of the blockchain. We've gathered the kings of consensus, the behemoths of blockchain. If you're a node operator watching this on YouTube, come to your consensus and join the call every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can find the link in the Antelope Node Operators Telegram channel. And if you're not a member of that and you're a node operator, you really should join. You can find that link with your nearest node operator pal. So let's get started. We do have an agenda of a few things to cover today, starting with a status update on 5.0. So I actually have fresh information from a meeting yesterday on this. We were discussing this with core developer that many of you are familiar with, Arig, who works closely with Yarkin, who's been working on some changes to the BLS host functions for some issues that we discovered in testing of the release candidates. That work, the fixes to that are complete. However, we are now kind of doing a bake-off between two versions of the host functions that have some differences in performance. And basically, there's a trade-off between how evolvable one of the options is, because it better abstracts some of the implementation details in a way that we can make changes without causing consensus issues in the future, versus the other option, which is known to be more performant. And so the bake-off is basically how much more performant, and is it worth the trade-off to to have that more evolvable option, which is of course our default position, is we'd much rather ship something that's changeable. So anyway, that work we're anticipating will be done this week. That's our hope. And that is the last remaining work for the 5.0 RC3 release. Now, there is a timing thing here, which is next week is holidays in the United States, and with folks being out, we don't want to do a release during that week. And then the following week, there's actually some important releases happening related to the EVM, as well as some important publications and whatnot that are discussing those releases. So right now, what we're targeting is a date for the release of RC3 between the 6th and the 14th of December. So, and that's, as you know, as we've discussed on previous calls, what is now in sort of latest in the 5.0 branch is what will be in release candidate, minus these host function changes, which of course are in a protocol feature that we're not recommending activation on anyway. So for the brave souls, if you're itching to get your hands on 5.0, you can do that now with a build on latest, or you can wait for the RC3, which again will be in sort of early December when that comes out. We don't anticipate a long duration between RC3 and stable, as most of the changes in RC3 are just reactions to issues that were found in RC2. So there's not really, we purposefully avoid major changes or sort of functionality additions or anything like that for these release candidates. So there's not a lot of surface area for new issues. But of course, it's possible that they emerge, and that's why we do ask that folks do kick the tires on RC3 when it's available. You could do that on test networks, or of course, if you do a non-block producer node, you can even do that in a production environment. So that's what I have to say about 5.0. Before I move into other sort of topical agenda items, are there any questions on 5.0? Okay. Eric or Kevin, anything to add?
Just put it in the chat. When you said latest, not of the main branch, that would be the latest of the release /5.0 branch. So if you're building it yourself, right, that's where you need to go, not the main branch.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for underscoring that. Exactly. And indeed, that is what our brave and fearless scout, Matthew Darwin, has done. So we're already getting some good tire kicking. He has steel toe boots and kicks the heck out of tires. So all right, so let's jump into the first topic, which is something we had wanted to get to last week, but we just ran out of time. And so this is basically getting feedback. It's not exactly a thrilling visual, but I'll share it my screen anyway, just to have visual aid. Yeah, so feedback on this change to support arbitrary labels on peer-to-peer peers. And to kick off this discussion, I'm going to hand over the mic to Mr. Kevin Heifner.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, this was part of the issues. Jonathan was working for improvements to the net plugin, and so he came up with this solution. I had some comments on here. We had some discussions back and forth, and so I just wanted to get some feedback from the community. So currently, this feature is set up to where it would be reported in Prometheus as a label on a outgoing address, and that's really currently the only functionality for this label that's coming in on this particular pull request. Now, conceivably, that label could be used for other things in the future, possibly or possibly not. I'm not sure. It's not clear to me exactly all the use cases we had in mind here. But my questions were there. So the way this is currently in this PR is that you specify a P2P peer address, and then you specify a separate corresponding P2P peer label, which has the same peer address with additional label on the end. My first thought is that seems a little silly, in that it seems like we could just add the label as part of a second, or an additional optional section of the P2P peer address itself. So instead of having P2P peer label, you just say P2P peer address equals, in this case, p2p.eos.io:976, and then favorite peer, and just tack it on to the end there, as opposed to having it as a separate part or separate option to the net plugin itself. That's my first question, is thoughts on that. The second question I have is that this also provides an API endpoint for modifying or adding that label. To me, that seems completely overkill, and I would at least entertain the option of not having that capability, and not having an ability to add or update a label after the node has been started, but simply have that only as startup options on the node. So that's pretty much the questions I have for this issue.
I'm not clear what it actually does. You put a label on a peer that you've specified that you are going to connect to. You are giving it a label. What is the end? What's the result of labeling it? Where would you see that label?
Currently, the only place that would be included is in Prometheus logging. So they would have been included in the Prometheus logging for that particular peer. And then also in the v1net connections JSON result, it would be included as a label in that JSON.
So you could get it wrong. I mean, you could label
You
it.
can put whatever you want there.
Whatever
Yeah,
you
you
want.
put whatever you want. It's simply a string. It's not used for anything else except
All right.
you specify it and then you get it back.
Okay. Yeah, not sure. I'm not sure if I would use it. Though, hey, nice thing to have.
Yeah, so currently we have our own custom labeling, which is a comment field before the P2Peer peer address, which of course nodeos knows nothing how to do with. Our tools know how to deal with it. So this would be good for us.
Okay.
As to the, because then it would show up in Prometheus. So that would be nice.
Wasn't there talk at one time about having, I don't know, like preferential peers or something along that line? I mean, I know the BP rotation and whatnot. Does this potentially lay some of the groundwork or tie into that, to where if you had a preferred peer labeled, or it would go through all the labeled peers first or whatever? Just curious.
Yeah, I think that was part of the potential idea for where this could go to, although it's not clear to me like whether that would be the best approach. Like, would you have to then start doing string processing on some sort of standard way of labeling something for that to happen? And at that point, I'm wondering whether you wouldn't be better off to add just a separate feature for that as opposed to like tacking it onto this. But it's not clear to me how that would get fleshed out.
Yeah, I mean, I would just poor man thinking is, like a list of preferred peers that match the labels, right? So, I mean, that way, yeah, you're not having to do parsing or formatting or whatever. Like, I know Matthew's labeling is actually indicative of a lot of things if you know how to read it. But if you're just trying to, like I say, make sure for the love of God, these peer-to-peers are my favorites, not the kangaroos. Go and get the Canadians, right? Actually, I guess they're both.
That's a lie. That's a lie.
But that being said, is that I could see how it would be useful for, then you could just provide a list of, all right, these are
like
the
like a firewall group, or an access list group, where you
or just say anything labeled, right? I mean, you could even kind of go, if you add a label, that gives it the ability to fall into a preferential
but
group. I don't know. I mean,
what we're saying here is it's nothing to do with that at all. It's literally a label that you see in the logging.
My question I knew there was that discussion which could kind of use that. So I was curious if it maybe was tied to it, but he said, not really, but maybe.
Yeah. Okay. No further questions.
I think the challenge here is that we're starting to really overuse the peer-to-peer address thing. It really needs like a data structure rather than sticking more stuff on it. Because now, like if I stick the label on the end of it, now I have to specify whether it's a block or a transaction peer first before the label, because that's already an optional field. Right?
Yes, that would be true.
So it's a host, port, type of connection, then label. And then something else comes along later, and then we have to stick it on the end of the label. I don't know. It's getting a bit unreadable. I guess that's probably the reason for the second line. Yeah,
I think that was the thought, was like use this as a different peer label. Unfortunately, the way this kind of fell out in this here is, though, you kind of have to repeat the P2P address because that's how it correlates the two. I think what you're saying is, like, if we needed, if we had a way of like specifying some sort of structure, which I'd have to go look at. I mean, this is standard .ini format, and I'm not sure what's available in standard .ini format in terms of like grouping structures together. whether there's any support for that or whether you have to kind of roll your own for that.
Probably have to roll your own. Switch to YAML. Why are we in INI?
Well, I mean, historically, right? I mean, it's been INI, and that's where we're at. So, yeah, going
throw it in a hidden .env file. That's always fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly a different sort of format, but that's a whole nother can of worms that I'm not sure we want to go to. But certainly I think we could do some sort of structured INI, whether that's like the P2P address equals a JSON structure potentially, and you do it that way, or whether it's whether you break it up into pieces and you build it up after the fact. Not exactly sure.
I mean, there is already the peer key, which is a separate config.
Right. Okay, so it sounds like there's some appetite to make this a bit easier to specify, as opposed to just one big long string of the peer address, is what I'm hearing.
Well, I mean, I'm fine with it, but then the next one then gets really hard.
Yeah, and the next one I believe is coming, at least the peer what is it, the auto peer discovery stuff, I think also wants to add something to the structure ultimately, and so yeah, that has to be folded in at some point.
So it might be worth, like, if this is not going in 5.0,
it's not,
then it might be worth increasing the scope or refactoring the peering config first, then roll this into that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Like probably the biggest part of this change is that understanding the how we want to format the configuration.
So just from my understanding, what is it about the current format that doesn't scale to more editions, and what might an alternative look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, currently we're using colon, right? So like if you look down at the bottom here and go up a few lines, you see where there's an example with the transaction. Yeah, so we're adding that here. There's talk, I think, of the auto BP peering adding something else here as well. And then if the label's at the end, well, obviously that means the label can't contain a colon, for example. And then there's additional issues here, which I forget how we addressed in this particular issue, but there's already issues with the fact that IPv6 has additional colons, and so there's kind of like some trickiness in parsing this already because of the way the IPC format is different from the IPv4 format. And so yeah, it just gets a little unwieldy as you keep using this one address line to have additional information.
Gotcha. So it's basically refactoring to improve readability and to avoid parsing complexity.
Yeah, like for example, maybe ideally you'd want something that said P2P peer, and you give it some sort of JSON structure that has address and label, and whether it's transaction or blocks, and whether it's IPv6, and all this kind of additional information you might put into a JSON. Some of that would be optional and some of it would not be, but that would allow you then to more clearly specify all of these.
Yeah, so that would be my, given we keep adding more things here, that would be my take at this point. And then I agree with you, Kevin. I think allowing you to change the label at runtime is probably overkill.
Yeah, want to avoid adding endpoints unless there's a really big use case for it, I think. Okay, cool.
But if you're adding a new peer,
yes, okay, that's a good point. Yeah, the connect probably would need to be expanded as well. Like would want it to be able to have the same sort of options as what you'd be able to specify in the command line.
So then if Clio's net connect then takes a JSON blob, then the JSON blob matches the same format as the config file. And
Yeah, that would make sense for sure. Seems like we should be able to go there, like that wouldn't be too hard to backwards compatibility in that, like, okay, is this a JSON blob? Okay, great, that's the new format. If it's just a string, well, okay, that's the old format. We'll just go with the defaults for everything.
okay, I think we're done.
Yep, thanks, appreciate it, guys.
I'm just capturing the crux of what we discussed here.
Well, it's not really adding scope to this. It's creating another issue before this one to build a customizable, or
Yeah.
more extensible, not customizable, extensible configuration line. And then once we have it, then adding a label into it is easy. I mean, they'll go together anyway, but
It'd be nice if we have auto discovery and automatic peer discovery, and then in that you would have like a name that I give my peer, and then when anybody else sees it inside of the peer table, it would come up with its own name.
well, we have that with the agent name already.
Yeah, but it's applying that through to some kind of peer table, like a fib, like in a router, same kind of thing, where it would be able to select the optimum peers and discover them using some kind of neighboring tool. We discussed this like a year ago, like one day.
Yeah, we've added, of course, some features that help with selecting optimum peers from a latency perspective, but discovery, of course, is something that hasn't made it into 5.0. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next topic, which Matthew, you're kind of the star here because you submitted for some of these, but I wanted to both get more from you and get some feedback from other node operator folks. So your suggestion here was to not force flush state files on nodeos exit, and some of your particulars are that you're using ZFS, and this was nodeos 3.2.4, and the concern was this, right, that it took a long time to stop nodeos because of the flush, right? One thing that when we discussed this as a team is that flushing on exit, and Kevin could probably cover the why on this if we want to get into it better than I can, but there is a reason for doing that, for maintaining consistency. And so the question is, with mapped private mode in 5.0, does that ease the pain point? So that is to say, it would still be flushing, but because of the way that mapped private mode works, the flush should happen more quickly. So any thoughts or feedback on that?
Well, okay, so I didn't test 5.0 on the big machines yet. The ship nodes are still running 3.2 or 4.0 or whatever earlier versions.
Gotcha.
So I think, well, I don't know how ZFS works, but my understanding is that if you want to flush this file, whatever's in the queue before needs to get flushed, because ZFS is going to write those things in order, right? So it's not about flushing the state for nodeos itself. It's about the fact that there's 500 megabytes per second being written by whatever other blockchain is running stupidly. And, you know, those things have to all flush to disk, and then the nodeos state gets flushed. So it's not you're flushing just, you know, the 30 megabytes or whatever it is, right? It's the fact that you have to actually run flush on the disk. Like, so if I reboot these machines, it takes a long time because it's got to flush, stop all the software, flush everything to disk, and, you know, it's an hour before a reboot happens. Like, is the disk is 55 terabytes.
Am I understanding right that you're saying that a large portion of the delay isn't nodeos's flush itself, but rather the lead time before nodeos can even start to flush to exit? Is
that's okay? I'm not a ZFS expert, but that's my understanding why it's taking the time it does, but I could be wrong.
Mine's not doing that. It's a ZFS on your on the state side or on the block side?
State. I mean, there's a ZFS mount point for state, blocks, chip, whatever. There's a unique one for each. But these machines are, you know, they have 1.5 terabytes of RAM. They're running, you know, 200 containers of various different things, right? nodeos is actually a small thing running on this.
Yeah, I don't have that problem, and I've got them running on big Proxmox environments where I'm using ZFS, and I don't have that. But I also, there's quite a few levers for ZFS, and you also have to make sure your ARC is set up, you know, your cache.
Yeah, the cache.
So,
I mean, I'm not using fancy cache. I'm just using RAM, but
yeah,
like half the RAM on the machine is just going to the ARC, really.
Yeah, I don't have like a Zlog or anything like that. Everything is just, it does the write checking on the disks themselves, and I've got it on NVMEs and on SAS disks. I don't know that problem, so it might be something else. I mean, sometimes it's slow. Like it's slow. It's slow, like slow as in like it might take a minute to stop.
But my disks are doing 500 megabytes per second all the time of writes.
Well, then that's probably your problem right there. You should probably invest in putting in fast cache Zlog, ZFS initial log disk. Yeah,
I think it's Postgres. I don't know.
There's your problem.
Or you could just use LVM. You can just do a little thing on the side there.
I'll be honest. I had, and you know me, I break everything I touch. I didn't have great experiences with ZFS, so I don't use it across any of our infrastructure. But
I tried
instead
not
you
to use
just
it.
break the block logs, right?
No, I just throw a bigger drive at it.
No, I just meant when your nodes crash or your machines crash, you have corrupted like blocks.log. I never have corrupted blocks.log.
Yeah, but I don't think your shit crashes like mine either.
It's also
Kevin,
ZFS,
do you think that
know.
ZFS would solve the problems that I've been showing you?
I mean, I really know very little to nothing about ZFS, so I don't have.
His answer is no. See, I told you.
No, I really have no idea.
I wrote an article on using ZFS with blocks and on a separate drive, and state history on a separate drive. Works really, really good for caching on spinning Rust, as well as taking snapshots, as well as compression. Compression is the big one. You get 30% compression on a block slot.
Yeah. So on these machines, that it's only NVMe drives. So it's 55 terabytes of NVMe.
Ross, could you share a link to that article you just referenced?
But yes, like the big ship machines, the ship and blocks log are on the HDDs, and the state is
it's fine.
Works perfect.
That works fine. Works fine. Yeah.
So what we'd like to say, I think, on this particular issue is that we have made improvements in 5.0. Even in the non-mapped private mode in terms of the performance here. However, we do see the flushing the state as being necessary, because the last of that is we clear the dirty bit, and you guys all know what the dirty bit is. So, you know, that's when you start up and it tells you that your state's corrupted. Well, that is what tells us whether, you know, the state has all been flushed out to disk. So if we don't do that, we don't have a mechanism for that. So I think what we'd like to do for this particular issue is just close it, let you guys test 5.0, and if and particularly the map private mode, but even the non-map private mode, and give us feedback there. And if you know if there's still issues, you know, maybe we can discuss that at that point. I would say another option you can do here, you know, and I'm not sure whether it's a performance win or not, but you could ultimately, if you game, you could kill -9 and then just always start from a snapshot. I mean, that's an alternative solution as well.
Yeah, that's the gray mass solution.
Yeah, I mean that's a solution to the issue, but.
This is where you have to narrate it, Brian, with that podcast narration voice.
Yeah. I'm actually just sharing this link both on the Node Operations channel and in our sort of internal engineering channel as well, just for context, so that folks can take a look. Out of
y'all should
curiosity,
read all those articles in there. There's a lot of great info.
yeah,
Thanks,
absolutely.
Ross.
Out of curiosity, how many of you on the call today are using ZFS? And if you're not, what are you using instead? Let's do, can you maybe reactions like thumbs up if you're using ZFS?
ZFS everywhere.
Yeah. I'm looking.
So at least 3 of you. It looks like Ross, Matthew Darwin, and JP are all using ZFS. Those who aren't, what are you using? You can post into the chat.
ext4.
Nothing wrong. Nothing wrong with ext4. Nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't scale as well.
Seems to work fine for me.
I was using MD admin to set up normal LVM RAID arrays this weekend. It was so painful because I'm so used to ZFS.
I was in a PERT controller not too long ago. You want to talk about back to DOS?
all of my PERT controllers are all set to HBA mode. Like I don't use any normal hardware RAID anymore.
Yeah, I don't either.
Because you know you get like
disks.
Yeah, you get error correcting with ZFS as well, right? So if it has any issues, it can try and fix it for you.
I don't have problems on the disk having bad blocks. It's the memory that NodeOS just shits a brick on. That's where the problem in the. No, Kevin, you can't use FAT32 because it's over 2 gigs, my man.
Well, we need something that's going to handle 8 terabytes. What are you talking about?
Yeah. NTFS too. You want to throw that in there? Run it on a Windows machine.
What does Mac use?
What do they call that?
I don't use Mac.
No, I don't know what they use. But once you use ZFS, and like it's so hard to go anywhere else afterwards.
I know, that's why we use ZFS for Aragon, even though the instructions for Aragon say do not use ZFS. Well, too bad. We're using it anyway.
I think what you meant to say was instead of it's hard to go somewhere else, it's hard to take a ZFS disk and take it and use it anywhere else. You got to go into like low level and clear some ZFS.
No, it's just 2 partitions.
Bro.
It's just 2 partitions.
Bro, it's so easy. It's so easy. Do you know I had a Proxmox server die? The OS hard disk died, and I was like, oh geez, now I'm screwed, right? How am I going to go and recreate it? And all I did was install a new disk array, and it automatically went and discovered all of the ZFS tools. And all I needed to do is just import them into new VMs. It was so easy. It was literally like, I don't know what you would do if it was ext4 or anything else like that. You'd be like messing around trying to get your fstab correct, you know.
That's why I hired a
ZFS,
Linux admin. I
baby.
just dump all that on him.
Yeah.
So you're just playing with cars now, that's what you're saying.
That is very true. And running the teams. And showing up on this awesome call every week to contribute what I can.
Well, we appreciate it, Michael. All right, so changing topics, I'd like to also talk about another Darwin issue. We should call this segment "Issues with Darwin." Anyway, so another issue. This is log non-default options, 1 per line, and I think the point here is not missed, right? Like it can get really long, right? And it can only get long.
That's why I brought it up, because when I'm looking at the log file, it's got this long line. It's like a paragraph that just scroll, so right. That's why.
So but the other thing is, the other side of this is, of course, if we do 1 per line, it would still be long. It would just be long in a different way, right?
Yeah,
and so
long in a greppable way, maybe.
Yeah, that's fair. One thing I wanted to ask about is whether it makes sense to expose this in some other way, like other than the log lines. So, like, in other words, leave the log lines as they are, but have some other way to get the information of your sort of non-default options that's more readable or serves your need better. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Sure.
But
let me tell you, I spent 5 seconds on this issue. I went, oh, look, the logs look ugly. Let me open a GitHub issue. That was it.
Yeah,
there's no other thought. I was trying to do something with it. It was just, it looks ugly to me. That's all. So feel free to do with this as you like. This was not a major thing.
Yep. Yeah, and I think likewise the response here, this first sentence, it's a style choice. So, like, it's not like there's a hard line on the other direction either. It's just kind of so
you should add another parameter to just give us that option.
No more parameters. Take some away.
Okay, I take it back. There is a hard line opinion on. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Anybody else have thoughts on this, or should we just move on?
I will say the rationale for putting it all on one line was that it's echoed on start, it's echoed on exit, and the whole point of this is when people paste in their log information, that hopefully it will include this line. So it being on one line, I think maybe helps that in terms of, like, if somebody just grabs the last 100 lines of a log, then it'll be there, or the last, or the first 10 lines of the log or whatever, it'll be there, as opposed to if it's a big block of 1 per line. I think we're less likely to have it included when things are reported. That was the reason it was put on one line. Now, so anyway, that's why.
Let's see how it goes. Let's see what we get.
Now it should, it's designed to not echo out things that you don't want reported, like private keys. Like, it will mask out signature private keys. You mentioned P2P address and peer keys as not being reported. It does report public keys. Those are fine. Those could be masked out as well, or are potentially not included. Like, the peer key could just not be included. I do think the P2P addresses are potentially useful. Now, if you think that that's leakage of too much information in a normal sense, then maybe we could mask out them, or maybe not include them. but they were kind of included on purpose as they could potentially be useful in debugging. But we're open to no, that's too much information to leak on a normal reporting mechanism.
No, I wasn't concerned about that. But we're gonna make those JSON blobs now, right? So now your log line is gonna have.
Yeah, that's true. It'll be even longer.
That's interesting. I wonder if there's not, well, I don't know if that makes sense. But where my head was going is just piping it to some utility that beautifies things or something like that. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if we're in a different space, you could have the nodeos call home and report to a standard IP address, and we could log all that. I don't know that crypto people would enjoy that sort of reporting mechanism.
Yeah, I don't think so. I get annoyed with blockchains that refuse to start unless they call home to get the Genesis file.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what? How's that decentralized?
Yeah, well, and what's being shoved the other way across that socket, right?
Yep. And to be clear though, I just meant like a local, locally piping your log output to something else,
Yeah, but people can already do that, to run your logs through to the Loki or whatever, right?
Yeah, well, that's my point. And also like if we had part of where I was going with that is like if we're gonna add JSON and it's gonna muck things up, like if there's some kind of like, anyway, I don't think it's important to discuss, but okay.
But it does
one,
come back to Michael's previous enhancement request was, please give me a HTTP endpoint to dump all my config.
Right.
I think you said something like that.
I did. I mean, it was ultimately you're having to go back and grep the config file to see whether things are on or off, right? So, one way or the other, if it's what features are enabled or off or whatever. But yeah, that was when I was monitoring and trying, you got 100 nodes. I don't know which ones have accounts enabled. I don't know which ones are running OC. I don't, so I was having to go and read the configs all the time because there's just no way to ask them.
Did you open a GitHub issue for that?
I don't think so. I think some of it may have gotten rolled into some of the get info too. I think there is I think there was a.
I know we discussed it on this call, but I don't know if you actually.
Get info 2 is what we've kind of referred to it as. I don't know what it is, a ticket about it.
That thing does not exist. There's no ticket for it. But now that we have this ability to like automatically grab the non-default options, which is what are logged. Like we don't log all options, we only log non-default options. And so, having an endpoint that return you all non-default options seems like would be a useful thing. And now that we can configure that endpoint somewhere where it wouldn't necessarily be
on a different port. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
then maybe even for that endpoint, maybe you don't even mask out things like private keys. Like, I'm not sure that'd be something we want to discuss.
Please do.
Okay, well, so yeah, maybe you even do that on for that. But
I don't. Yeah, in my mind, get info 2 did not include you signing private keys in an API endpoint.
But anyway, Michael, please open a GitHub issue for this.
Create get info 2. Done.
On a separate port with no private keys.
I'm not going to put that user story requirement on it. I just want to get info 2.
It just prints out what is it called, moo or whatever, where the cow say, that's it. Just prints out
as long as it doesn't have my private key, I'm fine with it being in get info.
We'll just have it dump. We'll just have it do a core dump and return the memory to you. You can parse it and figure it out.
There you go. There you go.
All right, so for this one, I wanted to ask the question for other node operators. So sit this one out, Matthew. Just kidding. Basically, when's the last time you needed to know whether a state file was compatible or not? How did you get an answer? And how much frustration did it cause you?
I just always assume the state isn't valid and launch from a snapshot.
Okay.
Everything else is pretty ambiguous, block logs, whatever, but state, man, good luck.
What would you do? What would you do differently if you knew that it was compatible?
Not use a snapshot. I mean, save myself 5-10 minutes.
I'll be honest. Whenever I restart a node, it's often a lucky surprise that it's all good.
Yeah.
Hey, whoa, nothing. Usually, if it's not compatible, it's because I compiled it wrong. If you compile it without using the hooks, the factory
pinning.
hooks, the pinning, yeah. If you don't do that, that's when it's going to come up and it's going to say it's got different versions, whatever. If you fire it up from a deb, it's usually fine.
Where it does burn some people, I don't know whether it burns it, but the reason that you only provide block logs is because it was impossible almost to give you anything else that would work on your environment, because it was always, the debs were built different than the pins, and go from one version to the other. So we've trained everybody on go get the logs, go get a snapshot from before it and restore, because the state is almost impossible to match. I'll be honest, it's even reusing that is problematic because it's a sparse file and it doesn't stay sparse long. You start moving that file around and don't understand what you're doing, and I mean, all of a sudden it's 128 gig file that you have no clue how it's coming from a 300 megabytes tarball.
When this would probably help is if you had like some kind of service script that you spun up, and without it having to hit like a hard stop, have it do a check. Are you going to be okay? Okay, now launch it. Maybe something like that.
Yeah, that's what I wrote there.
Oh,
that's what I wanted.
Oh,
right? So
that's exactly what
the current.
I didn't even read it.
The current workflow is, upgrade nodeos. Oh, you start it. Oh, it fails.
Okay.
With an error that you read from the logs, and it says, "Oh yeah, state is not compatible." Okay, well,
I totally didn't even read what you wrote there. So apparently we're on the same track.
We're on the same page. This is exactly these. So it's not about copying the state between machines. It's I already have the state on this machine. Now I've upgraded nodeos. So what I want to do is know what in the startup sequence, should I blow the state away, or should I, let it start? Is nodeos going to start with the state it has, or do I need to use a snapshot? Is basically the question I'm trying to answer.
I see from an automation standpoint.
I think it was a great idea that Ross had. Good idea, Ross.
I see that, from an automation standpoint, I guess if you're just mass deploying them, hey, don't restore the state if it's going to work. But to me, who is not heavily, scripting that load, running a leap util and seeing the result, to me, is the exact same thing as running start and saying, boop, state is not compatible. All right, duly noted, delete, restore from snapshot.
This only makes sense from a scripting perspective, right?
So, I mean, I get that, but yeah, I mean, to me, it's not useful really at all.
That is an interesting point. From a scripting perspective, how is this better than just like an exit code or something?
He'll know to use a snapshot versus being able to avoid the whole snapshot, right? I mean, making the script intelligent.
If nodeos has different exit codes for different things, then yes, you could do it that way. If nodeos fails with exit code 99, it means the state is not compatible. So therefore,
true, because you have no way of knowing why didn't it launch.
Yeah,
but the issue is that it tries to launch and then it wastes a lot of time doing that.
Oh, yeah, I thought it failed pretty quick on your state does not work.
There's some things where it starts up and then it exits after it already loaded all the memory. Like,
yeah,
I forget which one. There's a GitHub issue for that. Anyway,
very good.
But yes, this is
all right. Well, we are at time. I appreciate everybody taking the time to join, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys. See you later. Bye.